Good evening. Welcome back. I'm Minister Lee.
And I'm Pastor Mike. And it is good to be with you.
Here we are, week 4. We are going right through this Christmas series.
Yeah.
So, we're just going to keep on moving. And so what we want to do is we want to invite you to join in with us. These last 3 weeks, we have looked at the Christmas story. We've done everything from looking before Christmas with prophecies, looking at some of the main characters and kind of meeting them almost in a brand new way. Last week with Pastor Marco with us. So that was fantastic to have him with us. That's always a treat. And then here we are now. We are now actually past Christmas, even though for us Christmas is in a few days. But here we're just past Christmas. And so as you get ready at home to follow along, we are going to be in the book of Matthew, chapter 2. And Pastor Mike is going to read from verse 1 through verse 12.
All right. So if you have your Bibles, let's go. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all of the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, and the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened up their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by a different route.
So, what is going on here? Last week we ended with shepherds, we ended with a manger, we ended with Christmas. Where are we now?
So we are now, ironically, and I'm going to silence this, so sorry. We are still in Bethlehem.
Okay.
But this is where, our Christmas traditions kind of don't really match up with the reality of what was happening. And, so, I mean, if you think about, the song Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. I've been through 3-4 childbirth situations, 2 for my own girls, and I witnessed 2 others. There wasn't anything calm about childbirth. In matter of fact, ironically, when Jesus was born, it was at the time when everybody was in town. There was no room in the inn. We talked about that if you go back to the first session, but it would have been a lot busier than normal. So there's a lot of noise and hubbub going on. So if we look at sometimes our Christmas carols are idealistic in their thing, but I think if you come to my house, you're going to find a nativity scene.
Okay.
And the reality of it is that nativity scene is wholly inaccurate. Because where are the Magi? I mean, and matter of fact, we're going to see this, right? Because even on our Christmas service, we're going to have the nativity scene right up on the platform.
Yes,
right?
We are.
And who's going to be at our nativity scene? Who's in our nativity scene?
Well, it's the usual suspects, right? We have Mary, Joseph, and the baby. We have shepherds, and nothing, no manger would be complete without gifts. And the finest gift that. Well, actually, that's the little drummer boy.
Right, the little drummer boy. Right. That somehow doesn't make it.
But then we see the most famous 3 nameless kings in the world.
Right. Well, Melchior, Gaspar, and
Dave.
And Dave, right? Dave. I can't think of that. So we have 3 wise men in our nativity scenes with a baby, but the reality of it is What really was happening when the Magi came on scene is entirely different. So you're right when you opened up and you said, "Hey, the Christmas story is over," and people are like, "Well, wait a minute. What do you mean the Christmas story is over? You're talking about the Magi." So for those of you who don't know, the reality of it is we've now fast forward probably about 2 years is what the estimate is based on who the Magi are talking to with King Herod. And there's, when was Jesus actually born? Was he born 1 AD or 0 AD?
4,
And the reality is he was actually born most likely in 4 BC. And there's reasons for this, and I don't want to drag us into that. But what's interesting is here we are 2 years later, and where do we find Mary, Joseph, and the child? Because it doesn't say baby now; it says the child.
That's true.
We find them not back in Nazareth, where they came from, but we find them still in Bethlehem.
That's right. In a home.
In a home now. And we know a few things. We know that they're likely impoverished. And the reason we know that is because when they bring Jesus to the temple to be presented, they give the gift, the temple sacrifice, which is 2 pigeons, which is something only the poorest of the poor would have. So within 2 years, Joseph may have established himself as a carpenter. He may have gotten a business started and off the ground. But they're people of very common means when the Magi show up.
Okay, so following with you, we're saying that we're 2 years ahead. So basically Jesus is a toddler or becoming a toddler. They're in a home. But the question, and you've used this term a few times already, is what is a Magi?
Yeah.
Right? Because I know I've seen it, I've grown up, I've heard different things. 3 kings, Magi, wise men, scientists from the east. What are they?
Yeah. So there are many different, theories and stories, but the most likely and what most historians are going to go with is the recognition that these were probably wise men or Magi, we'll use the term to define the term, that probably came from Babylon. Now, why is that important? It's because if we think back in our history, going back 700 years, we find a very prominent Magi or wise man or astrologer that was in Babylon. And that is, of all people, Daniel.
That's right.
Daniel was taken into exile along with all the Jewish captives, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's right.
And they're taken as captives into Babylon, but then they are trained in all of the dark arts of the Babylonian wise men or the Babylonian magicians. But they learn these things, but they stay so close to the Lord that they actually begin to impact the king, the court of wise men and Magi. So Daniel knew all of these arts of astrology and wisdom, but it would seem that it's very likely that these wise men have both a knowledge of stars and looking at stars and trying to read the stars, as well as some measure of prophecy that 700 years later they're still relying on.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is, so we remember Daniel, there's the same Daniel in the lines then.
Correct.
Daniel, right? And what we realize is that, you had mentioned Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they weren't just part of them. They were the top tier. They were the leaders of this stuff, right? So it's very interesting, and we touched a little bit on this almost a year ago, I guess. Remember our Dual Citizens series, and we talked about Daniel but one of the things that was so interesting is, like you said, is that Daniel then gets promoted into into higher government
Yeah.
positions. And the higher he goes, the more successful he is by their standards, while never losing his own character, his own
Right.
morals, his own, even to the point when the government gets overthrown and a new government comes in, he becomes prime minister over there.
Right.
So it didn't even make a dip wherever he was.
Yeah, like,
he
happens
was
like
just
3
blessed.
times to him.
Exactly. And so what you're now saying is it wasn't just Daniel being good at his job so that he had somewhere to be and somewhere, but Daniel was also impacting.
Yeah.
And not just, but there is a good chance that Daniel's legacy lived on far behind them. It's interesting, and I have no way of proving this, but the Bible never mentions Daniel's genealogy after him.
Right.
There's never whether or not he was married, whether or not there were kids, and yet this is the legacy that lives on. And these could theoretically be sons of Daniel, that not biological, but
in knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now they are following. So they see something in the sky. They see the stars. They begin and they move.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know where I want to go because there's so many different things to try to unpack here. I guess the thing would be, what does it look like when wise men move? Right?
Yeah.
So why they must have some kind of regal or what's the decorum or presence about them that we can so interchangeably, like nobody's ever confused Einstein for the president. Right? Like those are two different things. So how do we go from scientists to kings? What about that? Or
Yeah.
can you speak on that?
I guess from the perspective of, they represented the top tier, like we said, they would have represented the top tier wisdom of their country. We Three Kings has been kind of, it's become part of our statement. But the bottom line is whether they were actual kings of their kingdoms, whether they were just wise men astrologers, I think the biggest thing that's most important is these were highly wealthy, highly influential, highly esteemed, highly educated men that were coming to find a king that they didn't even really fully know what they were looking for. They just knew that the star rose, and that star said, there is an important king. But it's interesting because, when they come to Herod, and what do they say is, we're looking for the one, where is the one who was born King of the Jews, right? So they didn't know who this was. They didn't know, and where's the first place that you go if you're going to look for a king?
The palace.
You're going to go to the palace. So it's interesting that they don't necessarily go. Here's a fascinating detail. How have they gotten this far? Following a star. But how do they end up in the palace? At some point, they stop following the star and they start following their own knowledge. Like, hey, we're getting close. Oh, it's taking us in this direction. It must mean that the new king of Israel being born is in the palace of Jerusalem, because that's where rulership came from.
That's good. It reminds me of how many times you take a family trip, right? And for us, if once we get on 95 north, if I'm coming south, I know where I am.
Yeah.
So I turn the GPS off. I'm like, oh, good, I got it. It's familiar. I know what's going on. And unfortunately, had I kept the GPS on, Waze would have told me that there was traffic.
Yeah.
But oh no, I've been here before and I know how this works. So I'll take it from here, thanks.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, you know why it's such a great analogy? Because what happens when you're stuck in that traffic jam, hopefully if you turn Waze back on,
Recalculate.
it picks up and goes, hey, let me take you a shortcut and get you there a different direction. Right. And to get ahead of ourselves, we find that later.
That's right.
Because when they leave Jerusalem, it says they're, what does it say over here? After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen rose ahead of them and went until it stopped. So bottom line is, they don't see this star again until they leave the place they assumed they were supposed to be in and get back on track with what set them on the course to begin with.
That's right.
And I think that's, even if we just stopped here and made an important detail, an important thought about it, is the recognition that how often we passionately want God. We want God's direction. We want God's will. We want God to lead us and direct us. And sometimes we get on this path where, man, we're really feeling it. It's like we're going for it. And then we get so confident in our ability to get to the destination we think that we're going that, we kind of forget about God. And we wonder when we get to where we think we're supposed to go and we don't have the outcome we think we were supposed to have. And then all of a sudden it's panic back to the knees to go, wait a minute. And then gratefully and gracefully, God is always there to redirect us and go, okay, let's pick back up. And that's what happened with these guys. They go to where they assume they should find the king. He's not there. But when they realize that, they don't just give up and go, well, then what do? They just go back out and look for the star again. And the star directs them to a different location.
Now, Pastor Mike, before we get to where the star directs them, there's this interim where the Bible talks about that once the question was asked, where's the king of the Jews? It's Herod becomes upset, and then all of Jerusalem becomes upset. I think the question then is, what are we? I understand Herod being upset, right? Because you're the sitting king. You didn't know that you were going to be dethroned. We were talking about this earlier. There's never been a king that was a baby. You can be a prince, but nobody's giving a kingdom to a king. And so as far as Herod knew, none of my wives just had kids. So what do we do? So we understand him being upset. Why would the Bible mention Jerusalem as a city being upset?
Because Herod was a nutcase.
Just in time for Christmas, we got a nice fruitcake.
Herod was insane. He was insane. All right, so a little bit of history on Herod, very brief history. Herod was part Jewish. Okay, so he was I'm not even going to pronounce it, Idumean king. So he was part Jewish and part not. So basically a Samaritan. So if we remember the story of the Samaritan,
that's right.
Basically we know that they had roots in Abraham, but they had intermarried, and so their bloodline was not pure. So Jewish people held Samaritans, at bay. Well, Herod was part Jewish, but he was obsessed with being seen as a Jew. And so he kept temple worship. Matter of fact, he was going to do everything he could to prove to everyone that he was not just a Jew, but he was the most Jewish of them all, to the point where he was crazy, but he was also brilliant. He was
that's where that line is, right?
Yeah, sometimes. So he builds the temple. So he rebuilds the temple. It's called Herod's Temple. And it was, there was a tabernacle. Yeah, Solomon had his temple. Yeah, there was a temple built in exile. But let me build you a temple like a temple you have never seen. Well, why is that important? Because now he's getting the Pharisees and Sadducees on his side, because he's now given them a place to exercise their religious authority. So they're now kind of beholden to this crazy king, because they finally have a place that roots their power. Okay, but back to Herod. So he's not fully Jewish, but he wants to be Jewish. So he's doing everything he can to show everybody that. But he is incredibly insecure. And towards the later part of his life, he begins to go ill. The Bible's not really clear on what that is, except that he's going. Historians will say that he was going ill, and it caused him to become mentally unstable. So to
even
the point,
more so.
Oh, way more so.
Right.
Like to the point where he has his favorite wife, who, by the way, is Jewish, and has her killed. His two oldest sons he has killed because he's afraid they're going to try to take over his throne. So anyone who he perceived to be in either any sort of threat to him, or anybody who seemed to get more attention than he did, he had him killed. There was a phrase that was common in the day that said, "It's better to be a pig in Herod's court than one of his own sons."
My gosh. So
bottom line is, everybody was afraid. If Herod was on the tear, everybody was afraid.
Now, Pastor Mike, one of the things that I find very interesting is that uh, how the Magi traveled.
Yeah.
Right? We typically see the silhouette of three camels, three men, and that's it. Right? You just a couple weeks ago when we talked about what it would have looked like for Joseph and Mary, and there probably would
Yeah.
have been some sort of a group, or I mean maybe for them because of what they were going through. But the
Yeah.
truth is, it's not just the two of them in terrain. There's usually this group. With the Magi, the reason I ask is because, okay, inside the court, inside the meeting with Herod, okay, Herod can be upset, but what would tip off all of Jerusalem?
So, I mean, here's the thing that's interesting, right? So, Herod being as crazy as he is, if only 3 kings showed up and said, hey, where's this king? Herod's reaction would have been just like, go Rocco. Take the guys out. Just get rid of them, right? So why doesn't Herod just automatically kill him? Well, on one hand, he's got some sense of evidence from the religious leaders that these guys might find out a potential threat to him. But the other side of it is, we keep saying 3 rulers, but there's nowhere in here that it says that there's 3 rulers, right? Or 3 magi or 3 kings. It says that kings traveling east, the only time we see 3 is they bring 3 gifts or 3 types of gifts.
Yeah.
Did they bring a gold box and a nugget of frankincense and a vial of myrrh?
Right.
Or did they bring baskets of gold and bushels of myrrh? We don't know, but we do know a few things. If they're royalty, then based on that alone, they're going to be traveling with servants. Number one. Number two, if they're traveling for hundreds, possibly thousands of miles, they're going to have to have enough animals to carry the provisions for this. Number three, if they're carrying great wealth to bring to a king, right? You're not going to bring a little box of gold, a little bit of perfume, and a little bit of incense to another king, especially if you're looking at the king of all kings.
So you're telling me this isn't like, Nana's $5 check at Christmas?
This is not Nana's $5 check at Christmas, that's for sure. They are coming with extreme wealth gifts because they're bringing it to another king, which means that traveling thousands of miles across the roads at a slow pace with camels means they're not only going to have camels and things for provisions and some servants to help take care, they're now bringing probably very large contingent of armed guards with them. So, it's funny, if you think about it, you saw the movie Aladdin?
Absolutely.
Right? My favorite scene in the movie, especially, forget the cartoon, do the live action one, right? When Aladdin comes to town, right?
As Prince Ali.
Oh,
yeah.
And now that I've said it, the song is going through my head.
Yes,
That is the one song. Once it's in your head, you can't get it out. Make way. But when you saw in that movie, it's kind of a funny movie, but the entire town is set on edge.
That's right.
And that's what we would have been looking at. We would have been looking at the sense that here is this royal entourage with all of their beasts and all of their armed guards and all coming in. And now you look, and Herod sees it. He's like, well, you can't just bump these guys off. And they're not but it also says that if there's some huge country or representatives, they're looking for somebody, and it's not me that they're looking for, then I've got a big problem. And I'm angry. And so all of Israel is now troubled, not just because of what, but because of, wait a minute, they valued, the religious establishment of the day valued a purchased peace, right? They had their temple, and they don't want anybody messing. We don't like Herod, but Herod's the crazy we'll deal with, because as long as we have him, we've got our temple, and as long as we've got our temple, we've got our authority, and we mean something, and we're important. And all of a sudden, now a threat to their own importance, their own stability, is now comes to play.
Well, it's interesting because, even when they come, they make this thing that I guess this request, this statement that I've glossed over so often, but it's, we come to worship.
Right.
You honor kings, you don't worship them. And so again, if I'm kind of taking that same thought that you were talking about of Herod wanting to be the Jew of Jews,
Right.
well, anything outside of worshiping God is blasphemous.
Right.
So I mean, this is this fine line where crazy Herod has to be kind of diplomatic to figure out what do I do with them, whatever. And so what we end up seeing is that he pulls them to the side and he says, well, why don't you go look? You
Right.
go look, and then you let me know, because I also want to go worship him.
Right.
So here we are. So they come out. What happens?
So I think this is an important thing to not gloss over real quick, because it dawns on me. We keep going. Why would Herod have pulled the Magi off secretly? So what was it that the religious leaders told Herod about this? That he would be the king of the Jews. He would essentially be the Messiah. Now, ironically, we don't see anywhere in here where the religious leaders get excited or do anything about it, right? But Herod, he's more interested. He has more belief in the prophecies than the ones who had the prophecies and actually expounded them. Said, oh yeah, it's the king we've been waiting for.
Right.
So Herod, if Herod said in front of them, hey, I want to find him, what does he risk? He risks the religious leaders turning their attention away from him as being their source to, wait a minute, there's a real Jew, and not only that, the king of the Jews, the one who would be in Bethlehem from David's line.
If that's true.
If
But
it's-
if it's not true, now he's blasphemous. He's lost his mind, and we can't even trust him now.
Right.
And we can use that against him.
Yeah.
Wow.
So why would he pull
That's
him
a
off
really good point.
again? And so then we look at it and we go, here these religious leaders are who have the very prophecies, know exactly what these guys are talking about, and make no move to do anything about it.
I mean, they don't. And again, I mean, obviously we weren't there, but the Magi say, we followed the star.
Yeah.
They leave. Nobody else looks up. But I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that. I'm like, because we've just not. Now listen, if three guys leave town on their camels, yeah, okay.
Right.
Well, that was kind of interesting. But if Prince Ali moves out
Right.
and goes, what is it? I don't know, 10 miles down the road, 10
Right.
miles down the road to Bethlehem. First of all, Bethlehem's a little town. Bethlehem's not big. Bethlehem's, I don't know, probably just a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000.
I think I remember, and it's interesting, right? Because we had just said 2 years ago is when they had a census.
Right.
So, historians believe that at that point, there could have been maybe only about 20 peers of Jesus at that time, little boys born in that same time frame. So, like you said, we're not talking about a lot of people,
Yeah.
a lot of children, a lot of anything.
Right.
And especially if you're committed to it.
Right.
Now I think, all right, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the Magi, we leave the palace from speaking to the king, and we're moving on out, and we're following this star. What am I expecting to see? Like, if I'm wrong about a palace, then what can I possibly be imagining? Like, at this point, it's like, okay, the White House is no joke, but you mean to tell me, like, okay, if it's on a mountainside over the course, looking over Malibu, okay, I get it. That makes sense. Okay, that's where Prince should be born. What? I mean, the constant faith or desire that these gentlemen have, and everybody who's following them, there's just something about it. And almost on a whim. Like, we know because we know how it ends.
Right.
But the idea that all of these things, and they're moving, and they find themselves at a house.
Yeah.
And then I guess, Pastor Mike, so I think it says here, right, that when they get there, the first thing that they do, they went on their way. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped.
Yeah.
I just have to imagine. I would have to imagine it's like Mary is living her life, doing yard work, doing whatever she needs to do, and all of a sudden a flash mob comes by, right? Hit it. We do the Prince Ali thing all over again. And what's most amazing about this is those people that are in authority of this group, because you can always tell who has the gravitas. That was the word I was looking for before. In the group, these men come and they worship.
Yeah.
Now, Pastor Mike, we had discussed this, and you brought up a point. Why is that so important that they led that way, as opposed to doing anything in a different order?
Yeah, so I mean, I think trying to figure out which way I want to come in on this, but bring a little backstory, but I'll just come straight to it. The bottom line of it is, here they come in, and by immediately coming in with worship, they show the priority of their heart, right? In those days, if you were going to meet another king, it'd be for the purpose of building a treaty, for connecting, for how do we open another trade route, how do we become allies. So what am I going to do? I'm going to lead with a token of both my appreciation for you, but also it shows you how important I am. My gift to you says, here it is, I'm giving you this because I recognize you're important, but because I have it to give, It shows you just how important I am.
That's good.
Because I didn't bring all of the wealth, I brought a piece of my wealth, right? And now that you've seen my wealth, now let's talk about a treaty, or let's talk about whatever. These guys come, they've traveled for thousands of miles possibly. They've gone through Herod, and they've come, and now they are in this little town, and they're in front of a child, and the only thing they know is this star has led them all this way to this moment, and this is now the greatest of all kings. And they don't lead out with, let's figure out how to build a relationship. Let me show you, hey, you know what, Joseph and Mary, we recognize your son is going to be very important. So let us show you how important we are, so that when the time comes that we do battle together. It says that the first thing that they did was they prostrated themselves. They bowed down and they worshiped him. Listen, they didn't bow down. You don't see that they bowed down to Herod.
That's right.
Okay? One rich ruler is not going to bow to another. They might shake hands. They might nod to one another. But it says the first thing that they did is they bowed down and they worshiped him. And then the next step after that is they now bring their gifts. And I think why it's important is this. So often we will bring our gift first and determine how much we'll worship second. Right? We're going to go, hey, you know what, God? I did my thing. I gave my tithe. I gave my offering. I hope you're happy with it. Like, now that we've done this, hey, I've given you my gift. So what's in it for me? How do we want to negotiate peace? Wow. How do we want to negotiate a good trade here, God? Because I've come with the best of what I've given you. I've given you 12% of my income. So that's got to be pretty good, because I know the guy down the street's probably only giving you 7%. So, you promised me if I give you this, this is what you're going to do for me. And so we come at God with our gifts, and then we wonder why we don't always understand the heart of worship. It's because we somehow feel like we did our part, God didn't do his, and so I'm a little resentful to God. Like, okay, God, I'll keep bringing you this gift. Bottom line is these guys is they recognize that far more important than the material gift they can give was the gift of their heart. And so when they opened their wealth, it was a sign of their heart, which they led the way with. They led the way with vulnerability. When you bow before somebody else, you're saying, I am placing myself in subservience to you. You are more important than I am. And now out of that, let me bring you of the wealth that I have.
I've not thought of it this way before, but it does. It carries even more weight when you consider they just spoke to the king, the sitting king, who has kind of given off the vibe of there's no way, no how. Whoever this is, I don't care who it is taking this spot. So like you said, it is purely an act of the heart. There is no future. It's not Herod's son, and so Herod's indebted to you. It's starting a whole relationship, and the truth of the matter is, I mean, let's take a step back for a minute and think about, what is that like for Mary and Joseph? You just said Bethlehem's not that big. There's a giant caravan. My neighbors now are, what is that noise? Here's what's happening, and I just went from broke to beyond more than I've ever seen in my life. How do you balance that? How do you stay humble in that?
Yeah.
How do you continue to, I mean, I don't even know. Like in Mary's case, it says that Mary and the baby were together. But then I think about Joseph and I go, man, am I secure enough to be the earthly father to the king of all Jews, which means he's going to be my king too.
Right.
Man, I mean, there's a lot. This Christmas story, man, just keeps unfolding.
Yeah. And I think, as we start to come around to the close and we wrap up this piece of it, is recognizing that there is, what happens with these Magi. And I think there's this transition where they start out being led by astrology. Here's an interesting fact, right? The Jewish people knew by the law they were to have nothing to do with astrologers, right? The law said that anybody who practices divination, astrology, witchcraft is to be put to death, okay? So here's guys who this is what they know, so their own worldly wisdom combined with a longing on their heart sends them on a mission. They get to the people who know the truth, but the people who know the truth do nothing with it. And yet they still continue to go seeking because they know there's something more. And all along the way, God is leading them through the means that they understand. They didn't have all the knowledge and truth. And I think sometimes, so often, the church is in the position of judging the world when the reality of it is the world, those who are not Christians, those who don't know Jesus, are really searching for him, but they don't have the truth, the knowledge, the history, the depth, or whatever. They just have fragments to go on. And so often they don't find Jesus because they come to church.
Mm. Pastor Mike, I think the takeaway for me, as I'm looking at this and even as we look at this series as a whole, I think somewhere we have the idea that when I do for God, life is easy, right? All I have to do is give God my yes. If I give him my yes, then he'll take care of everything else. And there's a part of that that's absolutely true. But taking care of everything else doesn't mean it's going to be easy or smooth. It means, can I put my trust in him?
Yeah.
This Christmas story started out, it starts out with a little girl who is pledged to be married, who is not married, who gets pregnant in a way that can't really be proven.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We have to take her word for it. The man that she's in a relationship with now has to determine whether or not the shame that she's already a part of, whether she likes it or not, if he's willing to take that on. So then they do that. Then they come. We see then they finally get together. They travel. They go into Bethlehem. They go to have this baby. They're completely shunned. The only people that end up accepting them are the filthy people that would make them unclean in the shepherds. And then finally, when things are just starting to make sense, all right, we're here. You got Joseph. You got Mary. You got little Jesus. He's walking. He's talking. He's doing things. Joseph's figuring his way out. Whether they were. Maybe they were too poor to leave in the first place, right? And so now they've set up shop and they're living this life. And just when things are finally starting to make sense, here come these astrologers. And to your point, man, these are people who should be stoned, which means that, again, one more time, just by being obedient, I'm once again casted to the side of my community. Once again, people are not going to, this isn't Nazareth where we talked about where the rules are a little, flighty. Hey, I know they're astrologers, but you got paid. You got a fat purse for it, so we'll take it, right? But here, right next to 10 miles from the king, and I guess my point is this. sometimes it seems that we are going so far back. And how could this ever be a blessing? How could this ever be something that God is actually using? How? Because God, if you were using it, then why is it so difficult? Why is every step harder than the next? And I don't know what the answer is in your life or in your story, but here's what I do know. A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Marco preached a message about ordinary people. And when we see that God only uses ordinary people, and not only does he use ordinary people, but it's our stories of obedience when things were getting difficult. Before we were called, before we had pastor in front of our name, before we were Magi, before whatever the case was, we were the ordinary people that said yes and continued to say yes to God. And so what I see here is I see that God does not take a shortcut. God doesn't say to Joseph and Mary, well, I'll tell you what, the fast track. I'm going to get you into the king's court and you guys will live happily ever after and it'll be a smooth transition. But they always, it was almost like, even from this young age, Jesus had just, he was born and understood rejection.
Yeah.
And it just helps us to realize that when he does call us in, it's not because he wants to have the biggest number of people around him, but because he remembers what it was like. He lived it. And this is how God chooses to relate.
Yeah. God
chooses to relate in our weaknesses. And I just think that there's something special about that in this Christmas story, to just remember that, it's not the porcelain figurines that we think that it was just so, and everybody was excited. But this was really a story and a time that people were really grinding through, trying to figure it out. And we thank God that today we have his Spirit that makes it all the more easier. Because if it's not for just a couple dreams, they never hear from God.
Yeah.
And, we have their story and we have, our Holy Spirit that helps to guide. So
it's hard to imagine how we could cover so much ground such a short period of time and yet know there's barely scratched the surface of the story. But I think for me, as I'm walking away from all of this, I think that I've noticed, and is very similar to you, is the idea of, I love how Pastor Marco's message of God uses ordinary people. God uses unexpected people. But the other side of it is, when I look at the story of the Magi, is, some people are wondering. They're looking for God. They're looking for him. And some of us who are Christians need to have a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. Pastor Marco was talking about that some weeks ago. To recognize that everybody who's seeking for God doesn't have Christian language to explain it.
That's right.
And so we point people to Jesus, not necessarily by breaking open theological law to them. And let me quote scriptures. Jesus said this, "They're going to know that you're my disciples by your love." I think in this season, we need to let the love of Jesus so overflow in our hearts that people see him. Our worship should outweigh our, how do I say this? In this season, I want us to be absolutely analyzing our heart and saying, are we seeking after Jesus and willing and looking to give him all of our lives? Or are we looking to negotiate with a ruler who will make our lives better? And in this moment, Jesus came, he was born on this earth to bring peace. He came to bring peace. And I think so many people are looking for gifts. They're looking for power. They're looking for everything external to find peace. But the peace that they'll find is only one that comes from inside. It's only coming from saying, I believe that Jesus was not just a baby in a manger, but he was the Son of God. He was the Prince of Peace. He was the one who came to give us hope. And so these men, when they came before they came, and what they were saying in their act of bowing in submission was saying, God, you're in charge. Mm-hmm. And in Christmas, the greatest gift that we can give is to say, God, you're in charge. I give you everything that I've got. But the interesting thing is, if that's really true, it then automatically results in a heart of generosity. God, how now do I show you all? And it's not just saying, okay, now let me give a bigger Christmas offering, but it's saying, how do I pour love out of me to those around? And that's what's important to me. God, you can use me because I'm ordinary. You can use me not because I'm wise or wealthy or whatever. You can use me because I'm willing to lay everything on the line to love those who are difficult to love. Wish we had more time to go further, but I love how it says that these wise men looking for Jesus, told to go back to warn Herod, they go home a different way. Man, I'll tell you what, when you encounter Jesus, it's almost cliche, but when you encounter Jesus, you go a different way. That's what I want to do. Sometimes we can find ourselves a bit like the temple Pharisees, really good, used to a good church service, but we've forgotten how to actually follow Jesus outside the walls of the building. And that's what I'm hoping we can all remember to do.
Amen. Amen. Well, we are just a few days away from Christmas, and so we want to, one more time, we want to invite you to come and celebrate with us here, Christmas at the Cathedral. We are back. We are in person. We are live. We cannot wait. So that is Christmas Day, so this Saturday, 11 o'clock. Come on out. Come on out as a family. It's just a wonderful time. And to be totally honest with you, this has been 2 years in the making. So we're so happy to be back.
It's been a while.
We are so happy to be back. But
kids come in your PJs.
Oh, that's right. That's right. There's something for everybody. So come on out. It's going to be a great time. And again, we thank you. We thank you. We pray that you have a safe and enjoyable holiday season. Oh no, not yet. I was going to say see you next year, but I guess we got one more.
We got one more to go.
We got one more, but we will see you next week. We love you, and have a great night.
Thank you for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed our presentation. Would you consider partnering with us to share the hope of God and the love of Jesus by giving? You can give your gift at klcc.us/give. Thank you for your generosity. Also, we would love to connect with you, so please follow, like, and subscribe to all of our social media platforms, as well as downloading our app on both the Apple and Google Play stores. Be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a thing. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.